Philippa Thomas. We can bring you a bit more international reaction now to the death of Nelson Mandela, because within the last few moments, the former US Secretary of State Colin Powell has been talking to my colleague Stephen Sackur. Here's what he said.
Well, when I heard the news last night, I was immediately saddened, but only for a moment, because this was a life well lived, and I rejoiced in his life. And I think that the outpouring of affection and support that you see coming from all over the world tells us what kind of a person he was. A man of honor, a man who lived for a purpose and was prepared to die for that purpose. And its simple purpose was to free the people of South Africa from the chains of apartheid, and not to take the black position against the white position in the future, but make it one South Africa, black and white together, moving forward. And he stuck with that principle and that purpose through 27 years of jail, through political difficulties, through all sorts of challenges. And he leaves behind an example for the rest of us to follow of what it means to have principles, what it means to act with moral and physical courage, to be a person of character. And above all, to remember that we all have a responsibility to help our fellow citizens to achieve a better place in life, to have freedom and democracy. I hope that even though he is passing, his image and his spirit will live on for generations to come.
Well, you talk about his values and his spirit. I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the man himself. You've met an awful lot of world leaders over the years. I just wonder, when you met Mandela, how he struck you in person.
In person, he was the most humble, gentle man, a tall man, and he had an engaging smile, and his eyes twinkled. So this was a human being who had spent all the time in jail, had all these difficulties, yet he kept his humanness. He kept his humanness, and he always was willing to reach out to other parties. And so I was deeply moved every time I met with Mr. Mandela. But nothing was like the day of his inauguration in May 1994, when I was privileged to attend. And I saw there the real Nelson Mandela, who came up on the stage preceded by the 4 generals of the South African Defense Force as his guard of honor, which was a symbolic moment where the power of the state was being given to this black man who had been in jail. And he came up and with humility gave his address, took the oath of office, recognized his jailers in the front row, and it was one of the most deeply moving moments in my experience as a diplomat and as a soldier. And so he really was a man of all the people of South Africa. And without him, as many people have said, it's not clear that the post-apartheid period would have succeeded if he was not leading it.
We've heard tributes paid to Nelson Mandela from all over the world. One of the most powerful came from Barack Obama, who talked about the direct personal inspiration that he took from Nelson Mandela. Would that be true in your case too? Because of course in your career you've broken barriers and boundaries. You were the first black US Secretary of State, and I just wonder whether Mandela meant an awful lot to you personally in that respect.
Yes, he did, because here was a man who was struggling, who was in jail, and I left the Army in 1993, so it was even before he became president. But he was always a presence in my life, in my early years in public service. And he was something of a contemporary with Martin Luther King Jr., and I think the parallels are rather striking and obvious. Both of them believed in something and were willing to fight and die for that something. And so, yes, he inspired me. I was privileged to be the first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, first black National Security Advisor, first black Secretary of State. But what I like to tell people is that I was the first Secretary of State who happened to be black, and put that descriptor behind the title. We have to sort of get beyond these labels depending upon your gender or your color or your background. I'm proud of being black, proud of being an immigrant from British subjects, but at the same time, I want to be seen as an American. And I think Nelson Mandela was able to create that kind of an image within South Africa. We're not black South Africans or white South Africans. We are South Africans who happen to be white and black, but we are one family, one nation, one people.
Nelson Mandela, I dare say, is the one African leader that all Americans know about and acknowledge and admire. But I just wonder, with Mandela's passing, whether you feel that the United States is truly engaging with Africa and Africa's future in the way you would like it to, and whether you feel the passing of Mandela might raise some real questions about the relationship between the United States and the continent of Africa.
No, I don't think so. I think in the last several administrations we have really reached out to Africa. In my time as Secretary of State, in those 4 years, we were able to significantly increase the aid that we gave to Africa. President Bush, when I was his Secretary of State, he put in place some very, very significant programs to deal with the problem of HIV/AIDS in Africa. So I think we have demonstrated that we believe in Africa. Africa is not a place that's far away to be ignored anymore. And some of the growth rates in some of the countries in Africa are the highest in the world. So Africa is coming along. Africa is a growth opportunity for the world. And America is going to be a part of helping that growth take place. But we still have problems in Africa. You can see it every day, whether it's in the Central African Republic or what's happening in Zimbabwe and the inability of Zimbabwe to move forward the way South Africa has moved forward. But the United States, I think, will remain deeply engaged in Africa, and we've demonstrated that in recent years.
And that was Colin Powell, the former US Secretary of State, talking a few moments ago to Stephen Sackur.